Today I'm going to be taking a look at The Big Bang Theory, Season 2, Episode 5, The Euclid Alternative. The episode gets this title because that's the alternate route Penny decides to take when she drives Sheldon to work. This episode starts off with Leonard entering the apartment. He looks exhausted and collapses immediately upon the couch, only to have Sheldon come out and tell him it's time to drive him to work, but he needs to stop at Pottery Barn along the way because he has some Darth Vader sheets that make him uncomfortable. He doesn't like the way Darth Vader's staring at him. Leonard then has to remind Sheldon that he has been working at night and he's going to be working overnight for the next couple of weeks because he has to do an experiment that he only has access to a laser for overnight. And he told Sheldon this ahead of time and told him that he needed to make alternative arrangements, which Sheldon failed to do. Sheldon's not happy, but Leonard heads to bed, telling Sheldon he needs to figure it out. So what does he do? He goes and gets Penny. He goes and wakes up Penny. She's not too happy about that, but he informs her that they're now friends, and so he has to call in a favor. Penny reluctantly agrees and starts driving Sheldon to work, although she pretty quickly regrets it, as Sheldon immediately starts criticizing her about the fact that her car's check engine light is on. I mean, that is concerning, but Sheldon really harps on it, and then he tries to engage her in some games that he would normally play with Leonard along the way, such as naming elements on the periodic table. Penny decides to take Euclid Avenue, which Sheldon informs her is the less efficient route because it has a lot more speed bumps. Then he realizes if Penny's not going to slow down for the speed bumps, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Sheldon does eventually annoy Penny to the point that she pulls over on the side of the road and tells him to get out, which he does. They must not have been too far, because Sheldon does make it to work, and then we see him at the end of his workday. He finds Leonard in the cafeteria and tells him he's now ready to ride home. Leonard reminds him again that he's going to be working overnight, so he can't leave right now, and he asks Howard for backup, but Howard says just for fun, he's going to take Sheldon's side. This backfires as Leonard goes to work, Sheldon needs another ride, and that's Howard. So next we get a very funny scene of Howard riding Sheldon on the back of his moped right back down, you guessed it, Euclid Avenue, and Sheldon is screaming and clutching and almost causing Howard to crash. We find out that this became too much for Howard, and he eventually kicks Sheldon off, leaving him in the middle of the street, and he's picked up by Raj. Raj starts to drive him home, but then Sheldon informs him he has a number of places he needs to stop along the way. He needs to stop at the comic book store because it's new comic book night. He needs to go to Radio Shack to get some new batteries. He needs to go to Pottery Barn to return the Darth Vader sheets, and he needs to go to the soup plantation because it's creamy tomato soup night. Raj has a better idea and instead just drops Sheldon off at home. He makes another attempt to ask Penny for a ride to the Pottery Barn to return his sheets, but she just closes the door in his face, and Sheldon heads back, thinking that if he turns off the nightlight, he can probably keep the sheets. The next morning, the whole group is gathered in the apartment as Sheldon comes out for the morning, and they tell him that they're holding an intervention. They've had enough, they've all gotten annoyed with his antics, and it's time for Sheldon to do something that he doesn't want to do. It's time for him to go down to the DMV, take a test, and get a learner's permit so that he can finally learn how to drive. They've made him an appointment, and Penny's going to take him, and he has a couple of conditions. They have to stop at the comic book store, Radio Shack, and, of course, Pottery Barn so that he can return his sheets. Howard tags along because he wants to go to the comic book store. Leonard goes to bed, leaving Raj sitting alone in the apartment, wanting to go to the comic book store too, but because Penny was there, he couldn't speak up. At the DMV, as they're waiting in line, Penny asks Sheldon why he never got a driver's license when he was 16 like everybody else, and he says he was otherwise occupied with some experiments that he was working on, so Penny asks what he was doing at 17. And we can assume the answer is the same. They make it up to the counter, and Sheldon gets his test. He then annoys the DMV worker behind the counter to the point that she just gives him his permit and tells him to leave. When Sheldon continues to make questions, she threatens to come over the counter, and Howard and Penny manage to pull Sheldon away and out of the DMV and leave, and he says he aced the test. Which in a way I guess he did. Back at the apartment, they have set up a very advanced simulator for Sheldon to practice driving. It's got some advanced software, and they've set up multiple monitors and some equipment to simulate being in a car. As he begins, it doesn't go well. He immediately seems to go wild and crash the car, and Penny, as she had previously promised him, hits him in the face with a pillow to simulate the airbag. Later that night, Sheldon's still practicing, but it's not getting any better. Leonard comes by, and somehow Sheldon has gotten his virtual car on the second floor of the Glendale Galleria and manages to crash into a pet store, at which point he says he's done, he quits, he doesn't want to learn to drive. And he actually says at this point that he thinks he's too evolved to drive. Leonard finds this a little pompous, but listens as Sheldon says, well, he might be an advanced form of human that anthropologists will someday have to decide. Leonard asks if he's quitting, and he says he never quits. He has risen above the situation. So Leonard asks him what he's going to do about getting to work. And what's Sheldon's solution? To live in his office. We see him emerge from his office a morning on his way to a shower, and Leonard notes that he's been staying there and is planning to stay there until Leonard finishes his experiment, at which point Raj notes that he's been done for a week, and Leonard says, yep, giving Leonard a bit of a break from Sheldon, which I guess anybody would need from time to time. And the closing scene is pretty funny. We get some of the university's custodial staff, and they are noting that there's been some strange occurrences at nights. Someone left some toast with the crust cut off, and then they look over and see Sheldon hunched over at the soda machine, hooded, and he says, "You've seen nothing," grabs his soda, and runs back off to his office, giving kind of a Phantom of the Opera kind of vibe. This episode is a fun one. It gives a lot to offer. We see that Sheldon is always trying to be controlling, but Leonard does stand up for himself when he needs to, and tells Sheldon, even though he wants him to, he's not going to give him a ride to work when he's having to stay up all night, come home, he's not going to turn around and drive him right back. I like the scene where we see him in Penny's car, and we see Penny's check engine light, and believe me, this is not the last time we are going to hear about Penny's check engine light. The main thing about this episode is that it's a big character-building episode for Sheldon. We see his annoyance. We know that he's a very annoying and specific person, and he needs a lot of help, although he doesn't want to admit it. And it takes his burning his way through each and every one of his friends for a ride before they say, enough's enough, Sheldon, you have to do something, you have to make a change. But in the end, Sheldon's going to do what Sheldon's going to do. He's going to find a way to make it work for himself, even if that means sleeping in his office and showering in the school's chemical lab. We also see Leonard has a little bit of a devious side by not telling Sheldon he can come home right away. And I've got to say, the driving simulator that they set up for Sheldon looked pretty awesome. I'd love to give that a try myself. All in all, this is a very fun and good episode, and I would rate it at a very high 9 out of 10. Please let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comments, and please be sure to like and subscribe, and keep an eye out for the next video coming soon.